Hi everybody, we are in chapter 8. Rabbi, thank you for joining us again. We're here at the Haas Promenade in Jerusalem. Behind us, the view of the old city and the city of David, a very, very special place. If you ever get to visit to see where history happened, it's amazing to be here in Israel. Rabbi, we're in chapter 8. We just saw at the end of chapter 7 that Shmuel he lives in Ramah, but he's doing his annual rounds through the country because he wants to keep his finger on the pulse. Different from the judges that ruled specifically in isolated cases, Shmuel goes through the country making sure that the nation is doing okay. And then we get to chapter 8 and we see that he is now old. His sons are supposed to take over, but again we see corruption. The way that we see with Eli and his sons, different type of corruption, but still a second generation corruption every time when they have to give the baton over to the next generation. What do we learn from this?
You know, in economics, it's easier to make $1 million than to hold on to $1 million. It's easier for the father to make the money than the sons to hold on to it, because the father may have been brought up with values and that helped him become who he was.
And he worked for it.
Well, when you're born into it, maybe you have different types of experiences, different types of feelings and challenges and so on. I mean, each are challenges, but they're different. And what we're really feeling over here in this chapter especially is the issue of succession. And Shmuel, we're told in the beginning Shmuel's old. That means that questions of succession come up right away. Who is going to take over? And as you pointed out, the comparison with Eli is wonderful, but here we should also note there's two types of leaderships. Shmuel's leadership came as a result of the failed leadership going within the larger house of Eli, but Eli is the Kohen, and his children were Kohanim, and they were Kohanim who were guilty of malpractice. What exactly the malpractice was in terms of, was it something which, as the text says, was it sexual, or as the rabbis try to clean it up a little bit and says was inappropriate behavior in terms of the religious duties, that we will leave that on the side, but there was malpractice. Over here, while Shmuel himself is a prophet, his children are judges, and that's not the same leadership, which means, you know, the previous book, we had the book of Shoftim, and then we go into the book of Shmuel, and then to the book of Melachim. So over here we have a book which is right between two different types of leadership.
And we have to see now this transition.
Right, so this is the point.
Really
so the book of
consolidate
Shmuel.
the kingship.
Right, so if the book of Shmuel is a book of transition, this is the chapter of transition. This is the chapter where we're moving literally from judges to king. This is where it's taking place, and of course the person who's overseeing this is the prophet, the seer, who is there, and he does not like what he hears, but the people come and they frame it in that exact way. I mean, you can read the verse where the people approach and exactly how they put it.
And they basically say to him that we see that your sons are corrupted, we don't want to move forward with them, and we need a king. Again, it's the same cry that we saw at the end of Judges. They feel that they have to have a king appointed over them. We can see that here in chapter 5, at the end of chapter 5. Therefore, appoint a king for us to govern us like all the other nations. And I think we should look into the Hebrew of that as well. And at this point, Shmuel feels rejected. And that's where God answers him, they didn't reject you, they rejected me. Which brings me to another question. We see in Deuteronomy 17 that God said, but you will appoint a king. So he knew that there's going to be this appointing, and still he also says that the people are rejecting him. So if we can just look into this whole, that they know that they want a king, but somewhere there's a rejection here.
And to strengthen your point, the appointment of a king is one of the commandments. Into the land, you shall appoint a king. So then why is Shmuel negative? So let's read the verse a little more carefully. I will read the Hebrew and translate. Vayamur elav, hinei ataz zakanta, you've become old, uvanecha lo holchu b'drachecha, and your children have not walked in your ways. So that's a very painful thing for a parent to hear. Your children are failures, you're great, but your children are failures, and that is obviously why Shmuel is going to take this as a personal attack. His sons, however, we're told were judges, and that's why I want to stress. And then they say, "Ata sima lanu melech l'shoftenu k'chol hagoyim."
There we go.
L'shoftenu. So it was interesting how you had translated it. The word that you would use for shoftenu was...
They say here govern.
Govern. So govern is right. The word, especially realizing that his sons were failed judges, and they're saying the sons are no good, and we need somebody l'shoftenu, someone to judge us. So it seems to be the point of focus over here is judging. Now that would seem to be why God says that they've actually rejected me, not rejected you. Now, to figure this out in order, essentially to unpack the issue over here, we read the verse in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, chapter 17, Yud Zayin. It says, Ki tavo la'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach v'yirishta v'yashavta ba. When you enter the land which God has given you, and you inherit it, you live there, you settle it, v'omart, and you'll say, Asima alai melech, put upon me a king, kechol hagayim, as all the nations, asher sivyotai, around me. So, and then it moves, and God says, Som tasim alecha melech, place a king. So,
like the nations around.
Right.
So he knew that they will put it in the context of
so
the
what's the
nations
problem?
around.
Exactly.
Correct.
So what's the problem?
Right.
So the problem, therefore, in my notes here, I bolded the word lishoftenu kechol hagayim. It doesn't say give us a king like everyone else, which means, are we dealing with the question of a type of leadership? What I mean by that is this going to be a procedural issue. We need someone as a king because otherwise you'll have anarchy. And what we'll need to discuss as we move on is what is the purpose of this king? What are the role of this king? But over here they say to judge us like all the other people. And there, God, who knows how to listen, God can read our thoughts and read our hearts, can certainly understand the words. And God understood them saying to judge us like everybody else, which is a rejection of Torah law. That they want the judgment to be like other people, not the procedure to set up a court system, but the rules that they will use will be like everyone else. And as a Shmuel is taking it personally, look, they've rejected me and they don't want my children. Well, your children are corrupt judges. But the point is not, what they really should have said is, give us a better judge who will judge us according to God's rules. They say,
they want a judge not according to
That's
Torah.
That's what God seems to be responding to over here. And therefore they're asking for a king who will, again, kings can judge with their own rules, their own laws, they can make them up and so on, because they have the right to do such a thing. So what we're hearing over here, the negativity of this, is because they seem to be asking for a different legal system, not just for a different type of leader.
So a king, a Jewish king, we see here that he's going to be different. God wants him to be different. What are the broader strokes about what we have to learn about a Jewish king? We also see in Deuteronomy, God sets a specific set of rules for this king that separates the way that he will be a king in comparison with the nations. So what is a Jewish king?
Well, what I'll say about a king right now, because there's more to speak as we move on to later chapters, but what I will see now as a king in terms of judging is the legal system has a responsibility of following all the procedural law. So therefore, if somebody does a terrible crime, they can only punish if there were witnesses, if there was warning of all the procedure. On the other hand, the king has this macro perspective and this, shall we call it a macro responsibility. And therefore, what if justice wasn't served? That's a very interesting term. I mean, for example, a terrible example. Let's say somebody does the type of a crime which is never done in public. Person, God forbid, let's say, is a rapist. Never two witnesses, never anybody warning them, and this person is victim after victim. So what do? So the court system can't deal with this. So according to a number of the early authorities, I'll quote, for example, someone known as the Ran, in one of his lectures, the Drashot HaRan, he says the king's responsibility is now to make sure that this man is not walking around free. And the king can now make sure that justice works. So therefore the legal system works with all the rules, and the king stands on top of that to make sure that all the rules work. And therefore he has the ability of making sure that we live in a just society, while procedurally the judicial system follows all the rules to make sure that we live in a just society. But as I said, there could be overlap there because sometimes the judicial system doesn't work. That's where the king needs to move in and use, let's say in America, we'd call a federal law, some other type of law, in order to make sure, to oversee and make sure that something didn't fall between the cracks and make sure that the innocent are in fact protected. That ultimately is going to be the role of the king.
And it says it here in verse 9, heed their demand, but warn them solemnly and tell them about the practices of any king who will rule over them.
Yes. So So it's really interesting. If the problem that they had with the children of Shmuel is because they took things, they took bribes, whatever, guess what a king is going to do? He'll be taking anything that he wants. We're saying, is your problem that they took, again, what's the problem? Is that they took things they shouldn't have? Well, that's what the king is going to do. Or is the problem over here a lack of justice? Okay, so that's a whole nother role. So therefore, as I said, there are different issues taking place over here. Of course, there's another role of king that we're going to meet very, very soon, and that will be the king as ultimately the head of the army as well.